Steve Anschutz, welcome to the ITA College Tennis Coaches Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, it's been a few years since we reconnected, but always enjoy our conversations and know I and our coaches will learn a lot today. So you're coming to the end of your season. I think it's April 17th today. What is one new lesson you learned this season that will serve you going into next season?
Well, I think the first thing I would start with is maybe everything that's kind of happening in the world of college athletics this past year. Watching everything that's happening at the D1 level is historic, to say the least. Um, with all these young adults, the transfer portal, jumping from one program to the next. I think it reminds me of how important it is to build a culture, make it feel like a family, and to really get like buy-in from your players, right? Getting a little bit more specific, maybe into like my specific season. I think one thing I really learned this year is how fragile a roster can be.
Mm,
Last year, my women's team, we were nationally ranked. We had a great team, amazing culture. We graduated our four of our top five players. So we kind of knew it was going to be a rebuilding year, right? We wouldn't have the same success. Um, but then our number two player, who we were really excited about, was a freshman. We're like, oh, she'll fit right into that number one spot her sophomore year. Ended up transferring home or like closer to home, you know, and then our top recruit got a last second scholarship for an NAIA school. So then our top recruit was gone. And then we had a third girl who she actually had last year off, was dealing with some injuries, but was going to come back this year and was going to be a really nice player for us. And her dad lost her job. And so she decided that she's just going to work instead of doing tennis to help pay for school because of the family situation. And so next thing you know, my number six player from last year is now my number one. And so I think I just learned how fragile a roster can be. Obviously, I always knew how important recruiting is,
hmm
but I think this whole rebuilding year and just the fragility of the roster, it went beyond even what I preconceived.
mm. Yeah, so going into next season, then basically you're not taking anything for granted.
Oh no, and I was talking to my assistant coaches, and we already do a lot of recruiting, but I think we're amping it up by either two or three times even what we've been doing because we don't want to ever be in this situation again. It's not good as a coach. It's not good for the team,
hmm
for the school, anything. And so we just don't want to be in a situation like that ever again.
Yeah. So, Steve, you are a father of two young boys, 2 and 4. You coach both the men's and women's team. You do some part-time coaching at a club. You help with high school tennis teams. Yet you still decided to pursue a doctorate of education. Why add that to your list of obligations?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and people always laugh at this. I think my wife told me to quit that program every single day I was in it. Every day. She said, is this the day you're going to quit the doctorate? And so, no, I made it through. Um, for me, education, it's a passion of mine. I love education, both formal education, like school, degrees, and informal education. I love to travel. I love to meet new people, ask a lot of questions. And so education is a big part of my life. And also, I love the subjects, right? Like being a tennis coach, we're in so many leadership opportunities.
Mhm.
My program was, it's a long title. It was called LEACHI, which stood for Leadership, Innovation, and Continuous Improvement. It was a doctorate of education degree. And I have a passion for those, right? Like for me as a coach, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but like I am continually looking at myself, trying to reflect where can I improve? Where can we be better as a team? What more can I provide for my players? How can I give them a better experience? I mean, those are questions I ask myself basically every day. And so for me, what's the best way of going all in on those passions and education? That's getting a doctorate.
Mhm.
And so Yeah, it was not for the faint of heart, but here we are, and now I'm done.
Well, congratulations as somebody who, yeah, pursued just a master's degree while I was coaching. I think it took me 5 or 6 years to get through that, and had young kids and all the rest of it. So my hat's off to you. And can you share maybe some of the pros and cons of pursuing higher degrees while coaching? I know what they were for me, but would love to hear from you.
Yeah. I would think first off is really time, right? I mean, as a coach, between running your program and recruiting, you already are a very busy person, and then you include your personal life and everything like that. But then you add graduate degrees, and it's just the next level. So when I did my MBA program, that was an in-person program, so I had to really manage my time well with practices, schedules, recruiting, with having to go to in-person class, which was mandatory. Then, when I got to the graduate program of the doctorate, even though that was all online, the amount of work that was required, it was
Hmm.
just a mountain to climb. And right, you know this as a coach, you put in a long day. All you want to do is go home and maybe relax a little bit. And then I have in back of my mind, oh man, I still have to do my dissertation. I still have to do this research. I have to write this today.
Yep.
And so again, it was not for the faint of heart. So I definitely think time is the biggest sacrifice, maybe, but there are other sacrifices, right? Because sometimes those sacrifices of time interfere with your family life, right? There was times where my wife, it's a Saturday, I finally have a weekend off. I'm not recruiting, I'm not coaching, and I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry. I have to take today and do my dissertation. So you have the kids today. I'm sorry about that, but this is due. So that was again the struggle and why my wife told me I had to quit like every single day because I mean it was a lot on her. So I always joke that I got a dissertation or a doctorate, but a lot of it was only because of my wife, right? And helping out and sacrificing. So those would be the cons. I think the pros would be you meet some really cool people along the way, people that really help you and help develop you as a leader or a manager, you know. So, like, for example, when I did my MBA program, I learned a ton on the finance side, accounting side. And so, within my programs that I teach and tennis, we have actually raised our fundraising budgets by 1,200%. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is just what I learned in the financing classes and things like that. And then in my doctoral program, obviously looking more at the leadership, innovation, continuous improvement, it just learning how to think a different way, like design thinking, innovation thinking, and also understanding what true leadership is, testing yourself, redefining it. So I feel way more comfortable in my own shoes and my leadership today than I did maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm. Yeah, makes sense. So, your doctorate of education, as you mentioned, was centered on leadership, innovation, and continuous improvement. And these are all topics I think most coaches are super interested in. But can you maybe name a leadership theory when you're sitting down researching or you're having a lecture or whatever it is that you actually turned into practical application? Because I think sometimes we as coaches read a lot, consume a lot of information, but don't really know how to apply those learnings effectively.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different leadership theories out there, right? And the two that I think I maybe naturally use the most and ones that I really try and look at from a theoretical perspective and turn it into practical application would be the first one is called servant leadership.
Hmm.
And servant leadership is where you focus or have your prioritize or you prioritize like the development and growth of the others rather than yourself and maybe even at the cost of the organization. So I feel like I use servant leadership a lot on one-on-one interactions. So I'm working with a person who isn't doing as well in school as I think they could be, or they're really struggling to try and find an internship. So I use a lot of servant leadership in those applications one-on-one because I like to have a lot of one-on-one meetings with my players throughout the semesters and things like that. And then more in a group setting, I would say I use what we call transformational leadership.
Hmm.
And that one's tricky because kind of the opposite of transformational leadership is transactional leadership. And that is so easy to fall into as coaches because if you just think about coaching, right, we have records, wins and losses, we have all these stats. And so in a whole life is centered around transactions. I mean, you think about the purchases you make, your bank accounts, paying off debts, everything is a transaction. So it's so easy to maybe fall into that trap of just being transactional. Oh, I provide a practice here, I do this. But transformational leadership is really trying to be more visionary, thinking ahead, motivating your players. And the most important part for me is achieving organizational goals, right? Through your players, not because you did it, but because you really came together as a team and a culture. So, in terms of those leadership styles, those are the two I use the most. Servant leadership on one-on-one conversations, which I think is really easy to apply, just looking at the theory and trying to put others before you. And then the second is transformational leadership and trying to get beyond transactions, right? And so I think when you had your interview with Paul Settles, he said it really well. When you meet with your players, what's their vision? What's their mission? What's your organization's vision? What's their mission? And kind of having those deep, maybe more philosophical conversations, and then applying that every single day in your practice. Why are we doing this? Why are we out here? What are we trying to achieve?
Hmm.
And I think those are the conversations you try and have as a coach.
Hmm. And so, Steve, this podcast will likely come out during the summer at some point. So, how can coaches, again, the summer is a great time to reflect,
Yeah.
regroup, think about what you want to do differently the following year, but how can they maybe flex or develop their leadership muscle during the summer? Is because they're maybe not interacting with their players as much, maybe they're interacting with other stakeholders, but they're desperate to be better leaders the next year. Is there any advice you have on what they can do?
Yeah. So I would first start off with I did my dissertation on growth mindset. So, one, I'm a big believer in growth mindset. And then, two, uh, I think what goes along with that is you're never done growing, right? So you could be a coach for 40 years and there's still things that you're going to learn and develop and get better at, especially as a leader. And so if you want to develop your leadership, as you said, like muscle or skills, I think first off, it is continual learning, lifelong learning and improvement. So reading books, I love reading books and everything like that. So I'm always looking for the next best leadership book, whether it's obviously a lot of them are outside of tennis, they're business books,
Hmm.
sports books, so on and so forth. So I think you definitely start there. And then number two is applying it. I think a lot of people read books and then they're done. And so what I try and tell people, and I tell my players this, is when you're trying to improve, you should read a book and you should take some notes of what you want to try and apply and then experiment, go for it, try it out. And so I think even if you're in the summertime and you're not with your team, I think there are ways to try and plan for that, right? In the upcoming season, or like you said, if you're giving lessons, try new practice plans, try different ways of coaching things. And then the last one, which probably is the most important during summer, is self-reflection. Uh,
Hmm.
like you said, we're almost to the end of the spring season here, and I do this every year, and it's one of my favorite weeks of the year. Right after the spring season wraps up, either that next week or 2 weeks later, I will take that whole week and I will reflect the whole week, and I will just look at different parts of my job because as you know, when you're a coach, maybe especially at the Division 3 level, you do everything, right? You're the trainer, you're the coach, you're the CEO in a sense, right? You're doing all the financing, budget, everything. So I self-reflect on everything. I look at my emails. What emails did I struggle with? What was my communication style? Um, did I make any really bad decisions this year? How did I come to that decision? Why did I do it? So I think there's a lot of self-reflection that has to be done, and I try and do it through the whole job. And so I take a whole week to do that. And so a lot of people think, well, man, how do you some people might think that's a waste, but I feel like that's one of the most important weeks of my whole year, entire like life, because that's how I make those jumps as a coach in terms of practices, budgeting, everything that
Hmm.
allow me to keep my program successful.
Hmm.
Um, and then the last thing that I do is, one of my weaknesses as a coach are the soft skills. It's hard for me to, how do I want to say it? It's just really hard for me to demonstrate how much I care for some reason. Even though I care a lot, it's really hard for me to demonstrate that. And so lots of times what I'll try and do is, in the summertime, I'll try and work on those weaknesses. And so I'll try and work on those soft skills. And you can do that with anyone. So I try and work on it just with my kids, I try and do it with friends, things like that, work on those soft skills. And my wife's the biggest critique, which is awesome. She's right there by my side, because again, my wife is super loving. She's very charismatic, and I'm a little bit more introverted. And because I'm introverted, it's really hard for me to show those feelings or those emotions.
Hmm. Well, I can relate to that for sure. So the next aspect we talked about was innovation. This was part of your dissertation as well. And so, can you maybe provide some examples of where you've had to innovate with your programs in recent years? Maybe during COVID, post COVID, but how has innovation kind of seeped into your program in recent years?
Yeah. I think the first thing about innovation that I always run into is, a lot of people are like intimidated by the idea of innovation, because I think people think of it bigger than what it is, right? All innovation really is coming up with new ideas, methods, procedures, or approaches to something,
Mhm.
right? So, like you said, it could be a new approach to your practices, a new approach to your marketing, on social media, anything like that. And so I try and innovate a lot. And again, they're not earth shattering. It's not like I'm creating a whole new way of coaching or anything like that. Um, but here's a really good example. So I coach two programs. I coach men's and women's tennis at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And that comes with some struggle, because a lot of times they're in the same season. And I'm one coach. They always want to be with the head coach. They always want to hear what head coach says. And so it's really hard to maybe only have an assistant coach with this program or things like that, right? They want me around. So what we did a few years ago, we had pretty large rosters. We were averaging right around 12 to 15 players on both teams. And the question was, well, how are we going to do these practices? Because right now, if we do it with separate practices, we're going to be out there probably for about 4 hours. And if it's on a day that we give individual lessons, we're going to be out there for 6 or 8 hours. And
Mhm.
we really just don't have time for that, because there's so much other stuff to do with the job, with recruiting and everything like that. So what we did, and again, this isn't earth shattering, but we had men practice, let's just say, for example, from 3 to 5, and the women went from 4 to 6. What was so nice about that plan is, instead of having two separate practices for 2 hours, we were able to run two 2 hour practices, but in 3 hours. And you're like, well, there's a 1 hour overlap. So how did you do it? Well, what we did was, the women would come at 4, and we would do their conditioning right away from 4 to 4:30.
Mhm.
So they didn't necessarily have to be on a court. They could be doing it in the field next to the courts, and stuff like that, from 4 to 4:30, and then they were warmed up, and then at 4:30 they would start doing their actual tennis practice. Well, at 4, if the men were going from 3 to 5, from 3 to 4:30 they were doing tennis related practice, and then at 4:30 they did their conditioning, and
Mhm.
then a cool down, and we're done with practice. So that middle hour, we were able to utilize our practice courts way better, get really good individualized practices in, but then also able to condense it so we weren't taking so much time every day on the practice court. So I think that's a really simple, again, not earth shattering way to innovate your practice schedules. And that's how you innovate, is just taking new approaches to practices or whatever you want to work on.
Mhm. So again, Steve, going back to kind of this summer and coaches using that time wisely, is the process they go through kind of sitting down, identifying maybe where they have some pain points in their program, and reflecting on that, thinking about, okay, what are the ways we can innovate this so this is a little less painful, or remove the pain completely? Or is it trying to think even bigger? Maybe it's not worrying about pain points, but thinking bigger about a particular goal for that year, and how we're going to innovate around accomplishing that goal. Again, any thoughts or advice on that process?
Yeah, so you are right. What you start with is you sort of start with either your pain points, or at the same time maybe clarifying your goals, right? And lots of times your goals are related to your pain points, right? So, like for instance, when
Hmm.
we came up with the practice schedule, our pain point was just the amount of time we were out there, right? Like on the days that we had the lessons with our players plus practices, like team practices on top of that, it just, us coaches were out there for 6+ hours, and it was just really hard because, like I said, I had other duties, our assistant coaches had other duties that we had to take care of, so it was just becoming too difficult. So then one of the goals was, how do we manage a time more efficiently at practice, but yet having extremely high level efficient practices, right? And we started going through the process of clarifying what that means. What does that look like? What do the players need from a conditioning perspective? What do they need from a practice perspective? And so it was looking at those goals, looking at those pain points all together, and then start brainstorming different ideas. Like, well, what if we did this? What if we delegated this? And just kind of thinking through it. And
Hmm.
then when we got to the fall and we started implementing it, we still had some things we had to work through, but that's okay. And we just corrected them as we went through it. And so I think from an innovation standpoint, like you said, that's kind of like a short term, that's how you look at it. And then once you start implementing it, you have to remember that, don't implement it and just say it's done. You have to keep improving it. And that goes on the continuous improvement side.
Hmm. Yeah, and then expanding on continuous improvement. I mean, we talk obviously a lot on this podcast about developing a culture of continuous improvement. Obviously, we want all our student athletes to be much better in all aspects of their life by their senior year or by the time they graduate. So, how are you going about developing that culture of continuous improvement? Obviously, you're doing it very successfully for yourself, but how are you instilling that into your student athletes?
Yeah. So one of the first ways, kind of you just said, is I try and role model it, right?
Mm.
The idea of keep pushing yourself, getting more degrees, or pushing yourself in your career, so on and so forth. And then the second thing that we do, and it's very important, is we set that as a very high bar and an expectation in the program. So, for instance, I know some coaches are very adamant about being on time, right? Like if you are late, you are running, or if you are late, you're not traveling, or it's an expectation. We hold the same expectation for continuous improvement in your life, not only just tennis. So I tell people, being acceptable is not acceptable, right? Being um, the same or not improving is not acceptable. We just, that's not part of our program. How are you pushing yourself academically? How are you pushing yourself to prepare for your future career? How are you pushing yourself as an athlete? How are you pushing yourself as a tennis player? Like, we look at all those tools, and when we have those individual meetings, that's one of the questions I ask them. Is I'm just asking, okay, how are you improving? What are you working on? What's the plan to continue to improve? And so we have, I would say it's an ongoing conversation. It might not be one specific thing we do. I think it's just that it's an expectation of our program, and two, we are constantly asking and bringing it up to our players. And by doing that, they naturally come up with questions, and they naturally come up with ways to improve. And then that's where that path of continuous improvement, I mean, it's up and down, it's left and right, it goes in many different directions, but in general it goes upwards. And that's what we want to see, is we want to see that progression. And I'm really proud of my players. Like, we have a player right now on our team who, right, we have all freshmen, and sometimes freshmen struggle their first year of school. But my gosh, this student has done so well progressing academically, and it's really just having those questions of continuous improvement. How are you improving? What are you doing? What are your study habits? What are you doing to improve your study habits to become even more efficient? And so I think that's kind of how we do it, is just asking a lot of questions and always bringing it up in our individual meetings.
Hmm. So, Steve, there continues to be a great debate as to what makes a great leader and the most effective leadership styles. I mean, most of the leadership books that you and I have read would talk about the ability to listen and be empathetic, but then people want to point to folks like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and, hey, they're some of the most successful leaders of all time, and they treated everybody like crap. And so, what is your definition of a great leader, and what traits do they embody in your mind?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, because when I was going through the doctorate program, we were specifically asked that question every semester.
Hmm.
And it was funny to kind of see how everyone's definition of leadership would just slightly tweak every semester.
Mm.
We're just going through the program and my own, right? And I think if you asked me this question 6 months ago, it might be slightly different than how I answer it now, and probably the same another 6 months from now.
Mm.
But for me, like I said, the two leadership styles that I am the most fan of are servant leadership and transformational leadership. So I think my definition is definitely going to be surrounded by those from like an umbrella standpoint. And so I think great leaders are the ones that balance individualized or personalized growth and development, along with getting those individuals to culminate or create a positive change for the organization, right? So, like, if you use my tennis programs for an example, I want all my players to be super successful academically, on the tennis court, in their careers. But I also want that to bleed into or culminate into our program being super successful, for us to have the highest GPA amongst the other programs here, or for us to have people graduating, having very successful careers, and being able to mentor our future, student athletes, so on and so forth. So I definitely think that would be my definition of great leadership. And then some of the traits that I look for when I think of someone as a leader, one is just listening. Is it someone that talks, or is it someone that truly listens and is empathetic? Obviously, serving others first, someone who empowers their teammates, or as a coach that empowers their players. The inspiration side, can you motivate people? Can you get them inspired to do something, whether it's small or a big task? Visionary is a really big one that comes up a lot. And then probably the last one for me, which is a big topic, is I always say, like, being intellectually strategic, right? Someone that, right, that kind of relates to that visionary, but someone that can think real long term. Where are we headed? Where are we going? And that can map it out somehow correctly. And you don't even really know how they got there and how they did it, but they were able to do it.
Mm.
And it's amazing skill sometimes how leaders are able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going through that process right now, Steve. So yeah, it's a long and arduous process, and you're throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and ripping things up and starting over. But yeah, hopefully I'll get it right. But switching gear, I mean, kind of, well, I guess along the same topics, a lot going on in college athletics. And so, what is your current view of the state of Division III athletics in general? And are you foresee any positive or negative impacts stemming from all the disruption happening at Division I, or yeah, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, we talk about this a lot as a staff,
Mm.
and I definitely foresee changes coming. I don't know if I have enough of any vision to tell you exactly what changes might be coming, but it feels like big changes are coming forward in the next few years, especially what you see happening at the D1 level. And you hear, right, you hear rumors of the powerhouse D1s kind of branching off and creating their own leagues and stuff like that. And
Mm.
the consequence to that would be, everyone's talking about, well, would the money dry up then that runs all these national tournaments and things like that? And so I definitely think changes will come. We just don't know what they are, right? Or if other funds come forward, and how they would work. Our national tournament is going to continue.
Hmm.
I do think at the same time, Division III has been a really strong model. Right? We have more Division III members of the NCAA than anything else.
Hmm.
So I think it's been really rewarding to the people in Division III and the schools. Um, what I'm most interested to see is, and you know this being from Ireland, that right, I would almost kind of like to see maybe like a relegation system come through over here. I think there's a lot of Division IIIs that are extremely successful that could compete at a higher level. Division I, Division II, Division III. Maybe it's not separated by money. Maybe it's just separated by success of programs. I would love to see people be able to move up, move down, something like that. But I know that's not a very popular or common thing in the United States. So
Hmm.
I don't really foresee that coming. It's just something that I'd like to see because I think it's a really cool system, the relegation system. But we'll see what the future holds.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, there has been discussion through the years of more of a federated model. I know other sports do that, like bowling, right? They have
Mhm.
different divisions playing against one another and still keep that competitive balance and yeah, challenging for a national championship at the end of the year. So yeah, maybe more of those things come into focus in the years to come, but time will tell. So let's move over to some rapid fire questions. What's one book that has had a major impact on you as a coach, teacher, or leader?
Well, I read a lot of books and I like to implement them right away. I'm going to give you one, maybe two. The first one is the one that I feel like influenced me the most, which is, again, I'm a very introverted person. And so when I first started out in coaching, right, you got to be a little bit more extroverted and talk to recruits and things like that. So Dale Carnegie's How to Make Friends and Influence People was a huge contribution to my life. It really helped me a lot on the recruiting side and understanding how people think and everything like that. And then a second book that I read more recently in the last 3 years here, I think, that I think was somewhat challenging as coaches because right, as coach, you like to think of your influence and our leadership and how much we can really help, was Sam Walker's The Captain Class. He was more, it's a really good read. I highly recommend it for coaches. But it's a good read because it kind of pinpoints that coaches aren't that important. It's more peer to peer leadership, and
Hmm.
so it really helped me think about my coaching and how I delegate and how much I give to players and who has control and everything like that. So I feel like that book actually has made me a better leader and a better coach because of learning how the really great programs, sports programs throughout the world have done it. And it's more peer to peer leadership than it is from like top down.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, those are great recommendations. Thank you. Favorite drill to do with your team?
So I like to create a lot of my own drills. Again, not that I'm like super amazing, innovative, but like I like to create my own. So I was always inspired by Mark Artizone. He's a very dynamic coach, comes up with some great drills.
Hmm.
My drills tend to be a little bit more, if you want to say, skill based. And I think a lot of us college coaches were all probably pretty big fans of Craig O'Shaughnessy's stuff, right? The
Hmm.
ABCD columns, Radley length stats, 1 through 4, 5 through 8, blah, 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 and serve return plus one. So I was sitting down looking at Craig's stuff and I'm like, man, how can I incorporate almost all these things in one drill that really resonates with my players and it doesn't focus on one thing and then they lose the other. So for instance, when you do serve and return drills, right? Well, what I've noticed at our level is either my players go so hard that then they're not consistent, or they're very consistent, but they're not going hard enough and not hurting the opponent hard enough.
Hmm.
And so, one drill that I created actually in the past year, and it's my favorite drill now, and it's not earth shattering, but we call it the 3-2-1 drill. And how it works is you play a regular set, but each game it goes to 15 points. And how it works is if you and I are playing the first two shots, my serve, your return, that's worth 3 points.
Hmm.
So if I double fault, it's 0-3. If I hit my serve, you hit in the net, it's 3-0. And then after that, the +1 shots are worth 2 points. And then anything past 4 shots is only worth 1 point.
Mm.
So I really like that drill because you know it still focuses on consistency. We use the columns to try and attack right away, but at the same time, it gives more importance to the beginning of the point. So your ability to start a point is really, really important, and that part of consistency.
Hmm.
And then we also do the drill as a 2-1 drill. So if we feel like the 3-2-1 is giving too many points to players, then we'll switch it to a 2-1 drill where the first 4 shots are only worth 2 points,
Hmm.
and then anything beyond is worth 1 point. But we do that drill a lot. I love it, and I feel like my players have just organically learned a lot from that drill.
Mm. Yeah, love that. Okay. You've mentioned your weaknesses as a coach, but what's your biggest strength you have as a coach?
I would think my biggest strength as a coach would be innovating our practices. I truly feel like our practices are really high level. I put a lot of time preparing always a week ahead, thinking about where have our weakness has been, but also where do we philosophically want to grow as tennis players. And I kind of created my own tennis curriculum as a coach. So putting that all together and thinking about our practice plans, I think our practice plans are really innovative and high level. So I think that's my greatest strength as a coach.
Hmm. Best piece of advice you've ever received as it relates to coaching or just life in general?
I'm going to relate it to coaching. When I was a young coach, I think one of the best things I ever did was I seeked out older coaches that were coaching for a long time, and I would just ask question after question after question. And there was a really highly respected coach in the Midwest by the name of Andy Hamilton. Andy was the coach at Grinnell College, and he really turned that program around. I'm pretty sure in his tenure in his conference, he went 84-2 over his time, which is amazing. And then he became the athletic director at
Mm.
Grinnell. And he was just a really nice guy, really great coach, always really, really respected. And I remember asking him tons of questions, and he gave me advice that I hold dearly to this day, and I tell it to anyone I mentor. He told me, when you schedule out your whole year in terms of matches, try and come up with a schedule where you will go 600, because then you have a winning record. Your team will be more confident going into the postseason, but you still have enough challenging matches to test your team and really see where they're at.
Mm.
And so whenever I create a schedule, I always try and figure out how can I be close or around 600, because I want enough challenges, but I want enough confidence going into the postseason.
Mm. Excellent. What do you believe is the best format for Division 3 tennis?
I feel
Yeah,
like I'm going to get in trouble with this. People are going to be calling me, how could you say that? Um, so I think I'm going to be in a very, very small minority of this. But I've mentioned this to other coaches. I think, and I don't think this format has ever been done before.
hmm.
I still think we should switch to what I call a 5-point format, which includes 2 doubles teams, 3 singles players, all played at the same time. Really exciting, regular tennis, 2 out of 3 sets, um, and the match would be done in hour and a half, 2 hours. And I think it'd be more team focused because you don't have someone playing both doubles and singles. But I think the really cool part of it is you could still switch up your team from match to match,
Hmm.
so on and so forth. But again, I think it just solves a lot of the maybe issues that people talk about today. But again, I don't foresee it happening. College people love the people can play both doubles and singles. I just think specializing might be more important for people to continue to grow and stuff like that.
All right. Well, thanks for being brave and answering that. One thing you hope your players have learned by the time they graduate from your program.
Yeah, so this is part of my own shtick, right? Things that I believe in, and so I always tell people, and I tell this to recruits all the time. My hope is that they learn that they can accomplish a lot more than they ever thought possible, and I truly believe that. I want people to think, wow, I never knew I could get those kind of grades. I never knew I could be that good of a tennis player. just anything. I didn't know I could get that kind of a job out of college.
Hmm.
That's how I want them to feel and what I want them to get out of being part of our program.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great message to finish with, and hopefully our coaches this summer take that approach and yeah, really stretch themselves as to what's possible for their own programs, and something I wish I'd done more myself as a coach as well. So I can definitely relate to that. But Steve, this was an absolute pleasure. I knew it would be. Really enjoyed this, and look forward to getting it out to our coaches.
Thank you so much, David.